On behalf of our team at Saha Zero Waste, I would like to warmly welcome each one of you to this session, which we hope will stimulate both thought and action. I'm Shobha Raghavan, the COO of the organization. Today, we would like to bring focus to environmental and social impact. In the 21st century, planet and people have to take center stage, and more than talk, it's important that delivery takes place at the ground level. So this is what we would like to discuss through our circular impact report, which is our report card for 2021. We are fortunate to have with us professionals and experts who in the next 1 hour will give us insights into how corporate governance has come to accept a reporting framework called ESG, through which environmental and social change is making its way into the mainstream narrative. And when it comes to waste management, we hope this will translate into better business models which focus on circular economy and resource recovery. For us, as well as Saha Zero Waste, this will mean that we will be back. We will be on track to scale our own business models so that we expand significantly and at the same time address the problem of waste. Let's go right ahead and begin. Let me introduce to you our first guest today, Dr. Mukund Rajan, who we would like to herewith invite to release our circular impact report. Welcome, sir. He will also share his insights into the ESG reporting structure and how this has the potential to change the way in which businesses have been traditionally structured. Dr. Mukund Rajan is the chairman of eCube Investment Advisors. He has held a number of senior executive positions through his 23-year career with the Tata Group. Dr. Rajan serves as a chairperson of the Environment Committee of FICCI. Mr. Mukund, the stage is yours now.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So should we take the report as having been released, and shall I get straight into my talk?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Lovely.
Thank you.
And I think a little further down, we're all going to be very excited to see some of the highlights that you'll be presenting. So congratulations to all of you at SAHAS for this report. So really, thank you so much once again. It's a privilege for me to be here today. I'd like to applaud Wilma, Shobha, and the entire team for the fantastic work that SAHAS has been doing over the last 2 decades. I had the good fortune some years back actually to chair a jury on the circular economy, where we recognized SAHAS as an emerging leader. And I'd like to congratulate Wilma and her team once again for the distance they've covered since then and for the thought leadership that the organization continues to display. Today's report is a great example of that. It's simple to absorb, identifies key metrics, and puts across perspectives in a very engaging manner. The circular economy is one of the concepts that is increasingly influencing corporate behavior, and it forms part of the emerging new focus that Shobha talked about, ESG, or environment, social, and governance. So what I want to share over the next 20 minutes as a preamble to a very interesting panel discussion that we have slated thereafter is a broad perspective on the ESG landscape in India. Now, ESG issues are seen to critically influence the sustainability of businesses. Their performance on material ESG criteria offer insights into their resilience in difficult times. In India, of course, such resilience has been severely tested during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic exposed the excessive short-termism of many Indian businesses with limited financial reserves and an inability to sustain overheads beyond a few weeks. The values that many in the corporate sector profess to adhere to have also come under scrutiny for their treatment of key stakeholder groups like employees and workers, and particularly the decisions to terminate jobs. While the pandemic revealed the ESG vulnerabilities of many Indian businesses, if you dig deeper, you could even argue that India is in the midst of what many would describe as an ESG crisis. Whether you look at the E of ESG, where the economic activity of Indian businesses has yielded some of the worst environmental indicators in the world, be it air pollution, land degradation, or groundwater depletion, or the S of ESG, where India again suffers from some of the worst indicators in the world, including female participation in the workforce and the poor absorption of representatives of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities in the private sector, or the G of ESG, governance, where the crisis is reflected in the large volume of insolvency cases, many linked to ethical misconduct and poor corporate governance, and their impact on the very high non-performing assets in the Indian banking system, a big reason for India's economic underperformance. It's clear that there is an ESG crisis in India today. And yet, the evidence in ESG is not all negative. The ESG crisis in India is stimulating important, mostly constructive reactions from stakeholders. For instance, growing public awareness and judicial activism are helping to force the pace of change towards better ESG practices. A good example of this is provided by what is playing out in the National Capital Region, particularly in the winter months when air pollution levels become quite dangerous. Prodded by angry public opinion and the courts, multiple actions have been taken from time to time by the authorities which have impacted businesses. For instance, think about the odd-even traffic rules to reduce vehicular traffic and the temporary bans on diesel genset operation, on construction and demolition activities, and on the use of firecrackers. Judicial pronouncements are also becoming more aggressive. The Madras High Court's judgment on the case relating to Sterlite Copper's unit in Tuticorin, or the Supreme Court's judgment on the BS4 to BS6 fuel migration are cases in point. There are also strong regulatory tailwinds in favor of a powerful new focus on ESG in India. These include the 2018 National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct, designed by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs to mainstream the concept of corporate responsibility. These guidelines have subsequently been integrated into the Business Responsibility and Sustainability reports that the Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, has directed the top 1,000 listed companies to publish from this fiscal on a voluntary basis and from the next fiscal on a mandatory basis. Parallelly, regulations with a significant focus on good governance are also influencing the conduct of Indian corporates. The key regulators, including SEBI, the insurance regulator, IRDAI, and the pension fund regulator, PFRDA, have each defined stewardship codes which emphasize ESG requirements for institutional investors across the mutual fund, insurance, and pension fund sectors in India. Going by an indicator like the rising against votes by these investors on EGM and shareholder resolutions, they are beginning to flex their muscles. Amendments to the Indian Companies Act in 2013 also provided for some important changes that are beneficial to minority shareholders, including approval of related party transactions by special resolution. As a consequence, and we've seen a lot of this in the media in recent weeks, we've seen minority shareholders express their upset on matters such as unreasonably high management compensation packages, which they proceeded to vote down, or voted out directors up for re-election who they felt did not discharge their responsibilities adequately. It's not very well known, but in fact, India has actually been rated amongst the best countries in the world in terms of shareholder rights protection in the World Bank's Doing Business 2020 report. The 2013 Companies Act amendments also stipulated mandatory rotation of auditors to improve the quality of audits and reduce the risk of auditor-client collusion. And of course, keeping Indian corporates on their toes are a clutch of stakeholder groups, including proxy advisory firms and activist funds that are demanding better accountability. All of these changes in the domestic landscape are also being catalyzed by the actions of stakeholders overseas. ESG concerns are rapidly transcending international boundaries. One of the critical drivers of this is the increasing concern about global environmental issues. These are issues that impact the whole world, and no single country on its own can successfully address them. So cooperation between nations is a must. The argument is in fact the same as in the case of COVID-19. Nobody is safe until everybody is safe. So examples include ozone depletion and the loss of biodiversity. But perhaps just now, the most pressing issue is climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change underlined the need to go well beyond the 2015 Paris Climate Treaty target of a 2 degrees rise in global temperatures by the turn of the century to instead target a lower 1.5 degrees rise. And this is going to call for dramatic economic transformation. These issues have also impacted international politics, reflected, for instance, in the surge of the Green parties in the European Union. The European Commission's president, Ursula von der Leyen, has repeatedly emphasized that her top priority is dealing with the climate emergency and ensuring the end of carbon emissions by the middle of the century. One outcome of this is the recent adoption by the Commission of a proposal for a carbon border adjustment mechanism to address the climate change crisis. This proposes to impose tariffs on goods imported from markets like India, which do not have currently strong carbon emission controls in place. Citizen movements have also evolved, such as the one that persuaded the UK Parliament to declare a climate emergency, but of course the school strike that was made famous by Greta Thunberg. International lenders are also seeing an increasing thrust on reporting of material climate-related risks by businesses in their financial filings, guided by the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So it will become progressively more difficult for businesses that do not evaluate and disclose the climate-related risks that they face to raise finance for their projects. Now, even moving beyond global environmental issues, we see that thanks to the interconnectedness of international markets, overseas stakeholders are able to influence corporate conduct in India. These include, very importantly, customers, especially millennials, who are increasingly demonstrating a preference to embrace purpose-driven brands. This is the reason a market leader like Unilever, which defines its purpose as making sustainable living commonplace, resolved last year that each of its 70,000 products would transparently show to their customers on their labels the quantity of greenhouse gases emitted during the process of manufacturing and shipping. Unilever is also, like many other multinational enterprises, raising ESG compliance standards for its supply chain participants from India. Foreign governments are also influencing corporate conduct in India with new legislations and compliance requirements designed to address corporate malfeasance and abuses. And these typically come with cross-jurisdictional and extraterritorial impact. So for instance, under the UK Bribery Act, it is entirely possible that Indian companies could be prosecuted in the United Kingdom for corrupt practices in totally different geographies, such as in Africa, merely by virtue of having a small footprint in the United Kingdom. And meanwhile, we see activists and nonprofits keen to hold Indian companies to account for their ESG lapses, conducting international campaigns against entities in sectors like mining and plantation activity that have allegedly failed to meet threshold standards of corporate responsibility. Many of these entities are also tracking closely the performance of Indian businesses on the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, defined by the United Nations, traversing issues ranging from poverty alleviation to addressing climate change. The SDGs have essentially fused the global with the local and created an interest of the international community in the way in which local issues are now being addressed within countries. Against this backdrop of international concern about ESG practices in India, foreign investors are certainly making their preferences clear. Entities now controlling over $100 trillion of invested funds around the world have now subscribed to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, or the UNPRI. These principles require investors to incorporate ESG issues into their investment analysis and decision-making processes. In India, in the past, some development financial institutions, DFIs, were already doing this. But now you have a situation where, for instance, the European Commission has put out regulations that require all asset managers in the European Union to disclose the ESG performance of the investment portfolios, which include many Indian companies. And of course, when investors open their wallets, companies will listen. This is something that I personally experienced 5 years back in the Tata Group, when Norges Bank, the Norwegian sovereign, as part of its decarbonization strategy, overnight divested its portfolio holdings in Tata Power because of that company's high dependency on coal-based thermal power production. And that in turn, in fact, sparked the pivot that you're seeing happening today at Tata Power towards renewable energy. So we should expect that Indian businesses that are non-compliant on critical ESG issues will be progressively excluded from the investment portfolios of the largest fund managers in the world. In essence, capital will be allocated in the future primarily towards well-governed Indian companies that contribute to the goals of a more sustainable economy and society. Forward-looking Indian companies recognize all of these pressures for change. They understand the value of being proactive in their response. They follow the academic research that demonstrates the powerful correlation between material ESG actions and firm outcomes. A greater focus on ESG has been shown to yield greater resource use efficiency, lower cost of operations, reduced risk and therefore reduced insurance premia, minimize regulatory and legal interventions, higher employee engagement, lower cost of borrowing, and increased analyst coverage and investor interest. Consequently, businesses that focus on improving their ESG performance tend to outperform their peers. And there is a body of empirical evidence on this ESG advantage that continues to grow. Data from, for instance, the MSCI India ESG Leaders Index shows that it has outperformed the broader benchmark index for most periods of time since its inception in 2007, including the past 3, 5, and 10-year periods. And you can see similar consistent outperformance with the National Stock Exchange's NSE's Nifty 100 ESG index when compared to the Nifty 100 index. So what do forward-looking companies do differently? First, they accept the need for change. You can see this with India's largest private sector company, Reliance Industries, which has acknowledged the climate change issue by setting a target to become net carbon zero by 2035. Next, they put in place the right governance structures to develop and execute ESG strategies that are relevant for them. So companies like Infosys and Ashok Leyland, for instance, have created ESG committees of the board. We see a greater focus in forward-looking businesses on resource use efficiency and embracing the concept of the circular economy with practices that minimize waste across product life cycles and prioritize better design for reuse, repair, and recycling of waste. These enterprises are also embracing their supply chains in the progressive actions they need to take. This is especially important because the MSMEs, the micro, small, and medium enterprises that form part of the supply chain of India's larger corporates, account today for close to half the actual resource consumption that takes place within the economy. Forward-looking enterprises are also endeavoring to improve diversity within their workforces. This includes gender diversity, the employment of more representatives of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities, and the recruitment of the physically challenged. Visionary leaders recognize that such endeavors don't cost much, but deliver outsized gains, particularly in brand value and reputation. Just as global leaders like Microsoft are doing, the best companies are now linking ESG performance on critical issues like carbon emission reduction and workforce diversity improvement to executive compensation. Integral to the link with compensation is a strong focus on measurement of ESG parameters that are material to their operations, tracking performance over time, and making transparent disclosures. There are multiple reporting frameworks being used, including the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, Integrated Reporting, or IR, and leverage of the standards developed by the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB. The measurement inputs into such frameworks are getting progressively more refined with new insights derived from evolving fields like natural capital valuation. While a universal framework is still elusive, the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report mandated by SEBI, or the BRSR, will offer one valuable tool for Indian businesses to communicate their ESG commitment. In the past, there have been allegations of non-transparency of data and greenwashing. With the guidelines issued for the preparation of the BRSR reports, such gaps will be scrutinized intently by a varied set of stakeholders, including regulators, analysts, proxy firms, activists, the media, and others. Meanwhile, a clutch of decision support service entities like MSCI, Sustainalytics, CRISIL, Acuite, and others are trying to process the voluminous data that's becoming available on ESG performance and coming out with ESG ratings. Forward-looking businesses are engaging with such ratings providers and ensuring that they provided the appropriate data so that the companies in turn can secure fair ratings. As the focus on ESG improvements steps up in India, we're already finding that in the limited universe, currently it is quite limited, of companies covered by an entity like MSCI, the percentage rated well at A or above has actually increased in the past 5 years from 19% to 26% of the universe. Let us hope that many more Indian companies will emerge as flag bearers and become role models for others. And perhaps at that time, we will be able to say that India is moving away from the current landscape of ESG crisis to one of ESG opportunity. So let me end now with appreciation again for the role that organizations like SAHAS are playing. What they are doing is ultimately driving behavior change at the community level. And this is where a huge amount of influence can be wielded. We have seen the way in which an issue like air pollution and its impact on the quality of life has captured the imagination of citizens in cities like in the National Capital Region. We will need to see the same confluence of public opinion, advocacy, engagement with the courts, progress in regulation, and smart application of technology to find the answers to India's waste management problem. And the thought leaders and pioneers like SAHAS have an incredibly important role to play in this. So once again, my warmest congratulations to Wilma and the team, and my very best wishes to them, and congratulations on the release of this report. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Mukundarajan. Your session was very informative and enlightening, especially the live examples of corporates beginning to adopt the ESG reporting framework and the climate change issues. Thank you once again. We would now like to take 2 to 3 minutes to present the key numbers of our circular impact report for the financial year 2021. Okay, looking at the key impact numbers of 2021, under ecosystem development, we have been able to support 100 plus customers through our services across 50 plus cities and towns. Our environment impact has been achieved by managing 25,000 metric tons and diverting 96% of waste from the landfill towards resource recovery and the corresponding carbon dioxide emission reductions. And finally, a social impact has been achieved by providing 157 jobs for people in the bottom of the pyramid and also enabled 1,500 indirect livelihood. Now, all of this has been largely possible due to the service fee, which is a charge to our customers, which has in turn then helped us deploy formal labor across the supply chain, We have been able to put processes, data systems, documents, and project management in place. We have been able to offer traceable solutions. And finally, we have been able to measure the outcomes and their corresponding impacts. So this is a quick presentation of our key impact numbers of the Circular Impact Report. We will be sharing it with all the participants. We move on to the next most interesting part of the program today. I would now like to begin our panel discussion on the solid waste management framework in the context of emerging ESG norms. Our first guest is Ms. Vinita Bali. Ms. Bali is a global business leader with extensive experience in leading large companies both in India and overseas. She has worked with multinationals like the Coca-Cola Company, Cadbury Schweppes, in a variety of marketing, general management, and chief executive roles, in addition to Britannia Industries Limited in India. In the last 5 years, she has actively pursued her wide-ranging interest in the corporate and development sectors. She brings a global and pragmatic perspective to strategy, marketing, innovation, and operations, having worked across countries and continents with responsibility for global and regional roles. Welcome, Ms. Vinita Bali.
Thank you.
We also have Mr. Nagaraj Prakasam, who is a versatile and passionate leader with 2+ decades of global experience in the USA and in India. As a full-time angel investor, he has invested in 21 startups and seen 4 exits. He has spearheaded impact thinking in Indian Angel Network and co-founded the IAN Impact. He is also a partner at Acumen, a New York-based $100 million impact venture fund. He is also an advisor and mentor in residence at NSRCL IIND. Earlier in his career, he was president of CDC Software and currently residing in Bangalore. Welcome, Mr. Nagaraj.
Hi.
Next, we have our CEO, Wilma Rodrigues, founder and CEO of Saha Zero Waste, a social enterprise committed to implementing holistic zero waste solutions across India. She believes that in the 21st century, businesses must not just talk, but deliver on environment and social impact. Wilma is a former journalist with the Times of India Group and the Business World magazine. She first set up the Sahas NGO in 2001 and then a business model, Saha Zero Waste, in 2013. Welcome, Ms. Wilma. I would also like to introduce our moderator today, Krishna, a co-founder and CEO of Sattva. Over the last decade, Krishna has been working with the leadership of global foundations, social organizations, and corporates to design and scale their social impact initiatives across India, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Europe. Krishna started his career as an early member of Dell R&D in India and was a founding partner of Longhouse Consulting, a boutique executive search firm focused on technology and emerging sectors in India. Welcome, Mr. Krishna, and over to you for a lively panel discussion.
Thanks so much, Shobha. Really appreciate it. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Congratulations again to everyone at Sahas and Wilma on a fantastic report. And we will talk up more about it. We might as well have called this panel, Wilma Fan Club, and we wouldn't be wrong, about it. I think what we will do today, I think we have two topics, in some sense to cover. And big thanks to Mukund for setting up the stage very well with the 3-4 very critical points he made. The ones that I want to kind of pick as we start forward is the fact that there is crisis and opportunity, and regulation is beginning to support the opportunity. Which is really where some of our learning in the CSR space kind of emerged. So some of those things I think is an interesting place for us to start. 2, leaders, in the boards of companies, wanting to embrace change, and then putting the G of the ESG, ahead to be able to then govern the rest of the aspects. So that embracing change is going to be an interesting part of the discussion, which I would love to get, people on the panel to comment on. And 3, the fact that at the end of the day, this is a challenge not just of reporting and and boardroom conversations. It eventually has to happen on the ground, which is where the models like the Sahas will start to kick in, and the real works happen in the field. So how do we kind of bring all of these pieces together? So that's the context of our conversations today. Again, big thanks to everybody here on the panel for joining us. And maybe Vinita, if we can start off, with you, on this embracing the change part, at the board level, how much of that, given the view that you're sitting in, how much of that embracing is happening? If at all, if yes, then what is leading to that, that change at the board? And do you see that also translate into real action, from an ESG perspective? We will come to the resource management, but maybe first start us off on the broader aspect of embracing change in corporate boards with respect to sustainability.
Thank you, Krishna. That's a very broad-based question, and a short answer to that really would be, well, it depends on the organization, because we are talking about a continuum of organizations. We're talking about some who, without ESG, were doing what is right, more or less, from an environment, social, and governance perspective. But I think what regulation does in India is it basically tells people that you have no choice. So whether it is about, appointing... Could I request everybody to please mute themselves? Thank you. So, so on that wide continuum, I think what regulation does is it doesn't give anybody an escape route. So I am going to be, somewhat controversial, fairly candid, and say that, some companies, the first question they ask is, okay, what do we need to do to start reporting? The question we should be asking is, what do we need to do to start running a better business? Removing our, carbon footprint, doing better in terms of all those things we keep talking about, diversity and inclusion, the differences between, median salaries and CEO salaries, and frankly, the entire governance cadence. So I think the good news is that SEBI has put a stake in the ground. And as Mukund said, it is voluntary in this fiscal year, and it becomes compulsory next year. Now, the moment something becomes compulsory, then everybody jumps, the auditors are jumping and everybody's jumping and saying, okay, now we've got to change something. So something good will definitely come out of it. I think the responsibility that, frankly, chief executives, other leaders of the corporate world, and several of them also double hat as directors in other companies, really have to ask themselves is, how do we tackle this systemically? Because this is not going away. This is not something that I can put a band-aid on and nobody will even notice. This is out there. It'll confront us, it'll challenge us, and so on. So the other good thing, which again I want to underscore, which Mukund said, is that, when investors, it started with, in some ways, the letter that Larry Fink wrote from BlackRock, and, so there's Norges, there's the Norwegian Pension Fund, and, all of these people get together and say, well, we're only going to invest in companies that are responsible when it comes to their ESG practices. So money talks. So I think in India, and I'll say this very openly, I think a good way to get things going is make it mandatory, put money behind it, which is going to happen. And also, I must say, to the proxy advisors, individuals, young employees of companies, etc., who are far more conscious or far more aware of the environment, I think that pressure will come. So these are good pressures. It's not going to happen overnight. There will be companies who are doing it right. There will be companies who will, as the Americans say, try and put lipstick on a pig, but it's not going to change the reality. And, slowly we will get there. So we'll be, the journey of companies will be in different phases. And I think that's fine. We also have to be pragmatic and say, let's begin. And as long as the change is positive directionally, and there is enough of a catalyst to either incentivize or penalize, things will begin to happen, because frankly, there's no alternative.
Absolutely. Vedha, thank you for that. And the money talks piece is definitely interesting. And Mukund, I want to come back to you for a quick comment in a bit. But Vedha, one follow-up though, before we move forward is it a conversation today around, hey, if I start doing this ESG sustainability, is it kind of bringing my profit down? Is it a or conversation? Or is it an and conversation? I mean, we know what happened in Danone, the whole conversation that happened saying, hey, you're kind of losing out, versus, what you're saying is it's not just a cost or there is actually money behind this. So we need to make the equation and, equitable equation on both sides, that if you don't do this, there's either a cost or there's something more that might come to you. So is it getting to an and, conversation, you feel?
I think that's also looking at it very simplistically. I think it has to operate from a conviction. After all, companies and managements operate on the basis of their beliefs and their conviction. There are companies who have proven, again, Mukund talked about Unilever. I have experience when I was in Britannia, and that's how, I got introduced to Sahas and the work that Wilma and team were doing when, before anything was specified, we started looking at fortification of our products. We did, all our recycling, etc., etc. So I actually think the or and just makes it very simplistic, and it's the wrong question. The question that boards have to ask managements and managements have to answer in unequivocal terms is, how do we create a business model that is sustainable and profitable? Because, if it is profitable and not sustainable, it's not going to last. If it is sustainable and not profitable, also it's not going to last. So I think the challenge really is, how do we think about business models with all the technology, with all the analytical horsepower that is available to us? I think it will be a shame if businesses are not able to create a model which is both delivering on sustainability as well as profitability. This is not about taking away profits to be sustainable.
Absolutely. So clearly, tending towards the and a very complicated and, that too. Mukund, a quick, question to you on the money talks part, investors putting pressure. Clearly, investors are also same people. So somebody's putting pressure on them. So who's that, and where does the chain kind of lead up to,
So that's where I think it's important to look at the role of politics in the European Union. Very clearly, I think the role of the Green parties, that's driving a lot of the regulatory changes that are taking place, which in turn is then leading the European Commission to legislate and put in place rules and regulations governing asset managers. And I think they are probably ahead of the curve. The Canadians are not too far behind. The US, of course, as we all know, during the Trump presidency actually took a few steps backwards. But now under Biden, you can see a huge amount of the pressure and the interest coming back. His appointment of John Kerry as a climate ambassador. So there's going to be a lot of action that you'll see now from the United States. But certainly a lot of it is coming from the politicians. Now they in turn are obviously being driven by the people who vote for them. And I think, some of the points that Vinita made, the younger generation, millennials, people are worried about the quality of life they're going to have and the quality of the planet that we're going to leave behind for the next generation. They are now beginning to come out actively on these kinds of issues. That's why Greta Thunberg, as a teenager, made these waves around the world. So I think there is a huge new pressure coming ultimately from communities, from the people who are already seeing the price that they have to pay. I mean, see the number of extreme climatic events we've had all across the globe, and certainly in India as well. Who ever heard in Mumbai, for instance, of cyclones? And now suddenly we've had 2 in the past 2 years. So I think now that people are feeling the impact of all this very personally, I think the drivers of change are now taking in.
That's very, very interesting, Mukund. I think that's an important, and for people, especially in the consumer business, that starts to become even more interesting. And like one of the impact investors, told long ago in a conference, I really admired, saying, the cultural mean of the world has to shift, in terms of what's accepted as good, and only then the larger change, kind of in some sense begins to happen. Naga, coming to you on the whole topic of impact investing, recently one of the leading investors in the impact space, without taking his name, said that impact investing is now dead. Every investing has to follow ESG. So I'm now changing my firm to become ESG investing. We're never going to use the word impact investing anymore, right? And he's now $150 million new fund that's getting set up now under the name of ESG investing. So is what's happening in the investing space? Is every investing going to look at the ESG lens? Is that shift beginning to happen? And will they start promoting models that are more ESG relevant?
Yeah, I think I'm very, very glad the merger started happening, right? As Mukund mentioned, with the ESG becoming voluntary and mandatory next year. 7 years back, when I've invested in Solaron, and we watched around 1,000 stocks, and we struggled to put Indian companies in the list, right? Finally, we ended up selling Solaron to Sustainalytics. And Whipple ended up moving to UK, as Mukund rightly mentioned. Europe was way ahead in the ESG piece of it 7 years back. So now I'm glad that we are able to marry that what was happening then today. So that if you look at the other part, impact investing, it's looked at like somebody like wearing a kurta and Jolna bag, right? That NGO kind of type. But that kind of created a separate segment. So when I invested in Solaron, so I was looking at, okay, how can we fix the corporate? So when I invested in social businesses, I was looking at how do we help the poor? I'm today very, very happy that the both conversation is merged today, right? Like, because this I've realized when I was in Bangladesh, there is a Brahmaputra widened by 5 kilometers, and this entire village is wiped out. The village was living on the banks, right? And they live in this pathetic condition. Their cow lives there, and this 10 by 10. So this is what I realized, that how the climate change is impacting the poor the most. So I'm glad the narrative changed completely. It is no longer about help the poor. I call the poor as the carbon fixers, the preventers, right? So today Elon Musk is selling $1 billion worth of carbon credit to Fiat. So he's been celebrated as a fixer. But what about the preventers, right? So we have 3 million households of weavers making handloom. That's sustainable fashion. Somebody living in a thatched roof house, that is a LEED platinum, right? Compared to grade A building in Bangalore, right? You do a carbon calculation of a poor living in, Dantewada compared with Bangalore and, London or New York, and he's rich, right? If you look at in US GDP terms, US is 8 times more than us in terms of GDP, but their per capita consumption is 6.8 times more than India. If carbon is the new gold, who's rich? So this is what I'm very glad that this poor, right, who are always impacted by everything that happens, today now it is good that do good, and you can also get recognized. So the point you mentioned asked about Vinita as well earlier, it is no longer P alone, that your ESG also bring you money. That's what Elon Musk is surviving in the last few years, collecting $1 billion bucks, doing good. So today doing good get rewarded. Earlier, doing good means you are a kurta guy, you stay out that side, right? But I'm very, very glad this is coming towards the end. So carbon is a new gold. I think that helps me really look at. So that also changed the narrative. It is no longer a poor weaver. He's a sustainable fashion maker. How do we make the carbon? He's no longer a poor farmer. He's doing organic, and here is a carbon footprint. And hope the COP, India is able to bring the carbon market in India. So where we can trade this carbon, we come from these weavers and farmers and the tribals, all of them today, they are rich, but we are not calculating. So I'm very, very glad that that marriage is happening. Yeah.
Thanks, Naga. I think that's a that's an important trend that you kind of highlight today, that it's all so connected. We can't kind of silo that out, and only say that this is one model that works. Before we move on to Wilma, Naga, are you seeing this conversation pick up with other investors as well? I mean, I know at IAN, at Acumen, these kind of organizations, obviously this is very mature conversation.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I want to mention about what Acumen did 20 years back when Acumen started. So Acumen was defining what impact investment in the whole world, right? So they said it's a passion capital. Acumen is a nonprofit, right? It took the philanthropic fund, bring in aid versus trade dialogue. But in India, the impact investment got skewed, right? The mainstream started coming to impact, thanks to the word what C.K. Prahalad coined, that fortune at the bottom of the pyramid. They saw there is a gold at the bottom. Everybody started carrying the bags, right? So when the mainstream started coming to impact, they started treating that as another mainstream VC fund. But we realized after 20 years in India, this impact invest completely skewed. So I'm seeing a difference now. The so-called impact investors are moving up. They say next 500 million. The mainstream, which is targeting top 250 million, that's too crowded. They're selling, I'm looking at next 500 million. So these guys who did not able to make an impact on the bottom of the economic pyramid moved up. Similarly, the mainstream guys not able to make money on Flipkart coming down. So I'm glad that bottom 250 million is completely vacant for Acumen come back to the space. That's what we did exactly last month. World's first agriculture resilient fund. So we put a fund, $58 million for smallholder farmers and climate resilience. So this is an amazing gap that formed, and we are able to come back again that, okay, guys, I'm glad you vacated the space. Now the real impact investors stand up, but with the new avatar, which is going to be sustainability story. Yeah.
Brilliant. Naga, thank you so much. I mean, that's really very encouraging. And I think it's also an opportunity, for all of us. So Wilma, we always want to hold everybody else accountable, as social entrepreneurs. We want to make sure that corporate reports, all the things that they do. But you ask social entrepreneurs saying, how are you create impact? They say we are doing work in the social space. That's more than enough. Don't ask me for any data and reporting. And, we're figuring out our theory of change. So in the middle of all of this, you've gone ahead and set a new bar for social entrepreneurs on, reporting your own numbers and data, which not too many social enterprises do. With Naga on my board, he's already making me work hard on putting my report out. So why this report and how this idea came up, and going out and putting a lot more data in the public domain? What are we looking to achieve here?
Yeah, so it's exactly that. The fact is that most of us in the social space or even in the social enterprise space go out there and get work done on the ground, and to a large extent we believe that is what we do best. And but at the same time, the communication of that, the endorsing of that, the actual validation of what is happening on the ground, that has been a weak spot with many of our organizations. And so, like, we learn from each other. We've learned, and we ourselves have transitioned from an NGO now to a private limited. And we've, over the years, learned a lot about accountability, processes, financial management. All of that has come from the corporate sector. And we have to thank, the sector for actually giving us all of that. So now, like the corporate sector reports, I wouldn't say reports more or does less, but like they do good work with reporting, we believe that our work on the ground must be communicated to all the stakeholders, because this is not something that that we should be keeping quiet about, because this is important work. And we'd like to see the impact also coming to everybody in the form of hard data. So that's what we've done very consciously over the last 3 years, when we invested in our MIS system, when we invested in a traceability system so that we know where the waste is going, what is the quantities of waste. And having got all of that data, we would now like to put out that data, and that's what we've done, because we do believe now that other organizations, who are now going to come into the ESG space must be able, and ESG governance and the framework must make decisions based on the data that is made available to them. Yeah, and so that's why it's important. Otherwise, we've also seen, and if I make a quick point here about sometimes, not all, but many corporates, reporting on sustainability focus a lot on the optics of it. Yeah, you see a lot of good photographs, you see a lot of things happening on the field for sure, but the actual impact of that, there seems to be a step back. So here in putting out, we've really been transparent. We've actually been able to show that the kind of benefit, because we have a service fee, as my colleague Shobha mentioned, what is the implications of that on the informal sector? And we actually created business worth 22 crores of rupees in all the work that we did, of course, with our own team first, but then also with our external partners. Now, this is something that many of our other stakeholders don't realize, because we are still put on the spot when it comes to waste management, saying this is how it was done for the last 50 to 60 years. There was no service fee, and this is how things were managed. Now, at this point of time, we need to show that what is the difference that the service fee has made. And I think that's what the report is showing. And, that's what we hope now other similar organizations will also do, so that there is a collective understanding and there is a collective change that will take place through that simple reporting that we have started to do.
Wonderful. Wilma, and I think it's, I don't know, it's like, worlds coming together. Like Naga said, the social stock exchange, is, I think with this measurement piece, it will start to get definitely very interesting as more people start to report at an enterprise, kind of a level. And I think you're also bringing up an interesting point that Mukund also alluded to about, data and measurement becoming important, and that's why so many firms, including the Crystals of the world, jumping into this space and looking at it from a data analytics point of view, because I think that's going to become in many ways a very important part of the engine that we will set up. More questions on the model, Wilma, but I'll probably bring Vinita back on little bit talking about the Britannia Sahas relationship. Vinita, when you started with that relationship, what was the conversation inside Britannia that led you to kind of eventually engage with someone like Sahas? And if you can give us some examples or anecdotes or data about how that actually helped Britannia, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. It was actually quite straightforward and simple. I'd come back to India after several years overseas, and I came to Bangalore, and I remembered Bangalore as this wonderful garden city. And when I drove to work from where I lived, which is Cunningham Road to Old Airport Road, there were so many heaps of garbage. And I mentioned to a friend of mine that, it just bothers me that this beautiful city has garbage lying everywhere. I mean, on every main road, there's garbage. So anyway, to cut a long story short, she had worked with Sahas. So we did a very interesting thing. In fact, that was the game changer. So, we said, let's follow the garbage. So one morning at about 6 o'clock, I took four of our young managers from Britannia and myself and this friend of mine. And we just followed the garbage truck. And that's where I first met Wilma. We went to the rag pickers colony. And I know that made a huge impact on me because, there were these little kids with their nails were black. They were working without any masks. And, the illness and everything was just so, so in your face. and we went to this landfill. Wilma, you will remember. It was a mountain of landfill, and the thing is, there's nothing you can do with it because it's all mixed garbage. So, I came back, and in the conversation, we were talking with Wilma and, talking to this other friend of mine. And I said, you know what, in 3 weeks, we're going to get this done. In other words, I gave us 3 weeks to say that we will either recycle our own garbage, which is composting. And, we had a very nice campus. We will compost all the wet waste. We will segregate the dry waste and reuse it. So honestly, what was my contribution? My contribution was nothing but getting a few young people with me. And we all came back saying, this has to be done. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And I would give a lot of credit to our facilities manager, to our admin guys. We put them in touch with Sahas. And what was really nice was that we created, Wilma's talked about a circular economy. We had a wonderful circular economy. We actually hired 2 people from Sahas. They were in the Britannia campus. We started segregating wet and dry. Wet was composted. And what we started doing was we started selling that compost to employees. And the money that we got from there went into a staff welfare fund. So, let's say an employee's wife falls sick or whatever. In addition to what we were doing regularly, we started putting that money into the staff welfare fund. So we created a wonderful staff welfare fund. We gave employment to 2 people from Sahas who sat there and further segregated the dry waste, the Tetra Pak cartons, the newspapers, the magazines, the this, the that. Some of this was actually used to make the Britannia bags, Britannia envelopes, the writing pads we wrote on, etc. So in a sense, actually everybody was making money and everybody was quite happy and the only thing that we sent out was sanitary waste, that requires particular incinerators. In other words, in 3 weeks, we went from generating all this waste in the Britannia office first to literally sending out nothing except sanitary waste. We then took this whole thing and we took it to our factories as well, because what is possible here is possible in the factories. We then created a wonderful opportunity saying, every employee lives somewhere, right? So what if you were able to do this in the apartment complex or the street on which you live? I remember I invited Wilma and the Sahas people to the apartment complex where I live. And I'm very proud to say we're working with Sahas. We're segregating waste. Again, like in Britannia, we're only sending out sanitary waste. And we are composting all our wet waste here, etc. The point I want to make is, I just want to make one more point and then I'll end. I think I come back to this conviction. You do it because it just seems the right thing to do. What was disappointing, however, was, when we did this, every CII meeting, everything we used to be invited, I used to be invited and asked to tell the story of what we did, because we got some Namma Bangalore award and we got some other awards and so on and so forth. I must have personally hosted over 100 CEOs to our facility in Britannia, because we made an investment in the composting equipment and so on, the payback period of which was like 6 months. So out of 100, I am really sorry to say, we only got some 6 or 7 conversions. People would come, CEOs would come and say, great, 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 and go back. And then there was something else that was a priority for them to deal with. And I actually think these are the kinds of things that have to be made as, made part of CEO performance assessment. It's like, if you believe in something, you've got to make sure it gets done. Now, did I do anything in Britannia? The answer is no. All the stuff was done by the facilities manager, but it was very clear. If you need anything on this and you're not getting decisions, you walk right into my office and we'll give you the decisions. And it worked. And he was the one who went around everywhere collecting these awards and became very well known because, but that's the right thing to do.
No, absolutely, Vinita, and thanks. Very, very inspiring. And I remember those are the times we also did the Freedom Park big event where we set up all the stuff with the same dear friend of yours.
Absolutely. And to cut a long story short, it was again something in my mind, something which is quite simple. You take a city like Bangalore, 60 to 70% of the waste that is generated by bulk generators.
Yeah.
Hotels, hospitals, restaurants, the municipal market, and so on. And the whole Freedom Park idea really was to showcase that there was a solution to dealing with waste. And by the way, if the bulk generators would take care of the waste they were generating, then the municipal corporation's workload actually reduces to collecting only 30% of the waste and not 100% of the waste.
Yeah.
Even though we had those high court judgments about segregating waste and so on and so forth, the other issue really with all of this is implementation. And unless there is follow through and there is this pakka implementation, that enduring change will not come. But once you do it, our building works, on its own now.
Absolutely. No, that's a fantastic point. I think two very interesting things. That you kind of brought up, which I want to now bring Mukund and Naga into the conversation. Mukund, so you heard the conversion ratio, and we've been through that, and early days, and of course the regulation started to change things, in some of the areas. So today, do you see in the emergence of the ESG frameworks, the resource recovery and the waste management getting enough support, and can we expect better understanding and better, change management, behavior change, and embracing the change, from corporate leadership, given what the ESG frameworks are now asking them to do?
I think in the case of waste management, perhaps less immediately the pressure because of a broader ESG framework. But I think more because of specific regulations that have now been introduced through this past decade. So the plastic waste management, for instance, or extended producer responsibility, battery waste disposal. There are rules now governing each of these. And in fact, there is a lot of heat now in the industry which produces these, manufactures them, to also have in place protocols for collection. And that's now raising many of the questions that Vinita also touched upon. For instance, the role of segregation, both in the household and also when waste lands up at your waste disposal or collection points, the role of the municipal corporation in then processing it further. And the fact is, across the board in India, I think municipal corporations are woefully inadequately prepared to really deal with the volume of waste already being generated. So, but the important thing is now that there is a responsibility on corporates to collect back a lot of this waste, they are now interesting themselves in finding solutions and ways to be helpful even to the municipal corporation. So that sense of public-private partnership is always being thrust on them to find those answers. So short answer, I don't think from the ESG perspective, at least on the issue of waste management, it's yet high up on the priority of investors. But certainly, I think the regulation is driving it in that direction. And pretty soon, people will start asking these questions because it impacts quality of life for everybody. So I think the run-of-the-mill investor will also start bringing up these questions when they look at companies that they're investing in.
Very, very useful, Mukund. I think that view and that perspective is definitely useful for all of us looking at waste management. Naga, from your perspective, is waste management a conversation in the impact ESG investing ecosystem? If so, what kind of business models or what kind of models are being talked about? Obviously there are different things about it. Should it be circular economy? Should it be energy? So what is the conversation in the investing world around waste management models?
Yeah, I think the one is about, if you look at when I invested in Sahas, I was telling that you are the next WM, right? So WM of US It's $1 billion company, Fortune 500 company. I told Wilma that you are the WM of India, right? Okay, when I invested, people are asking, like, where is the tech in Sahas? Right? They're just collecting waste, right? Just like stinking business, right? Where is the money? So I said, go read about WM, right? And then look at this, right? So when I lived in the US, when we segregate more, we spend more money. So this is what Wilma was telling, the change in the customer behavior in India, right? Hey, you are the culprit, you produce the waste, you pay me the money. I'm not going to pay you any penny. That's a service fee that talks about, right? I'm very glad that the Zero Waste Campus title that she put up, I think people like Vinita with their pioneers, they picked up that, the campus, what you see behind IMB. Today, look at, there are 100 ton of these zero waste campuses being created, right? So that means that owning the waste. So that's what Sahas was the major focus of. You own the waste, they ensure that, give us peace of mind to Vinita or IMB director that your waste is not contaminating Mandor. Your waste is not being eaten up by cow that dies, right? So that peace of mind was started earlier. But if you started looking at, owning that piece of it, that helped us today look at 63 million ton get moved out. But now what do we do with the wet waste, right? So we were doing compost in the IMB campus. It takes a month to do a vermicompost. So can we do the best? I think that's what the biogas, a 100-year-old technology that's a flop in the country. My grandfather had a gobar gas plant 50 years back. But we got greedy, right? We dump everything. We thought the energy will come that kills the bacteria. But Som and Kevin had figured out, they said there is a discipline required, guys, right? Now they are able to run around 3 plants. There are big companies coming like Mahindra, Tata's. There's entire Jaipur, right? The river has been cleaned. The slurry is now converted into bio-CNG that's going to run vehicles in Jaipur. In Namakkal, right? There is a poultry capital of India, 2,300 ton of poultry waste every day happening. So now with IOCL, we have a plant running. So next week in Salem, there are 2 hotels going to have a carbon neutral idli in their menu, right? So like this, now this entrepreneurs like Wilma and so able to pick up these problems, they're able to clearly divide and make this 100-year-old technology working. That's, I'm glad now government is waking up. First time the finance minister talking about bio-CNG in the budget speech. Now today bio-CNG is in a priority lending. So now today in the carbon masters able to raise green finance, right? 2 of our investors from Native Lead has given green finance debt to him for him to go enable the Namakkal. So this narrative changing, it is helping across the board. That's what I'm very, very glad in terms of how this is now. This organic fertilizer is able to put an agripreneur in sitting in Kolar who can take this fertilizer to it, right? That's what I was telling last month. I received notebooks from Sahas and tomato from Carbon Masters. I was really amazing, right? Just, okay, the waste we threw out at IMB got converted in notebooks, came to my house. The wet waste from Sahas goes to Carbon Masters and they grow tomatoes. They send me a sample. I think this is the great thing about while we are looking at urbanization, creating more polluted city. But I'm glad, I think now people are innovating in terms of how do we make the city better. Now CNG first station in Bangalore came up. Carbon Master truck was the only CNG vehicle, bio-CNG vehicle in Bangalore. But today now CNG vehicles come, we can pump the gas. In Indore, we pump the bus with this, gas that's coming out. I am Indore running in our gas. So like this energy is kind of changing, but it's going to help us in the GDP as well because, our number 1 is the fuel import. But 160,000 ton of waste, 50% wet waste, look at how many LPG we can do and reduce our trade deficit in terms of importing that. So this energy has a huge role to play. I'm also a fan of electric vehicle, but 70% of India's power is from coal. So you're not polluting in Bangalore, but you're polluting somewhere else. So in net emissions from India, the electric vehicle, long way to go. But I'm glad that bio-CNG can play a fantastic role in removing that. I'm glad already entrepreneurs have picked up and looking at what can be done. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Naga. And I think a lot of them are very, very innovative models. And that's when, in the beginning I said, we all look up to Wilma and Sahas to, manage our waste in Bangalore, even as recently as yesterday in a new apartment I have moved in, when they asked for waste management solution, I said, okay, Sahas, right? So Wilma, everybody's calling Sahas now, which means, and the numbers are staggering, 50 cities, 100 customers, so many metric tons. I'm sure you're also, your hands are full of challenges. So resource management, resource recovery, and the circular economy principles in waste management, how does one implement this? What are the top 3-4 challenges that you and Sahas, the team of Sahas, have to address to do this and do this at scale? Because, building a model is not enough. We need to solve the problem, be done with it, in the next couple of decades, at best. So what are the challenges in front of you all, Wilma?
Yeah, so the first thing is, of course, we would like this endorsement of the service fee. We have kind of made some breakthroughs in Bangalore, Chennai, in the south. But if we have to scale, if we have to go even to a Mumbai or to a NCR or definitely to Kolkata, the acceptance of people paying for waste is almost not there at all in these new geographies. So that is one of the biggest challenges that we currently face. The second would be for us to look at the kind of recycling for all kinds of dry waste which is available in the country. There's a big gap in terms of recycling, because today when you look at plastic waste, when you look at the fact that the kinds of plastic that you have and recycling is limited grades of plastic, PET, HDP, these rigid bottles, that's about the limited recycling that is available. The rest of the plastic, a big chunk of it goes to what we call co-processing, which is a kind of energy recovery in a cement kiln. We would like to see really, now that the plastic rules have very clearly defined how limited amounts of plastic waste should go to even co-processing cement kilns, we'd like to see a bigger infrastructure investment happening in recycling of plastic waste. And then plastic has got all of the attention, but there is also the other waste streams which are equally catching up in terms of volumes. Look at our fabric and textile waste. That also is actually plastic, because all the polymers, have also plastic in them. So we'd like to see now responsibility, whether it is in the form of EPR or other regulations, comes for these kinds of waste streams as well, whether it is textile waste and also paper. Everybody, because plastic is kind of feeling the heat right now. You have paper packaging, picking up and talking about being the alternative, but paper production, paper recycling is still not quite there. So we really have to look again, we have to come back to reduce. And that's where, although we as an organization are a waste management company and we manage waste, but our first principle is also reduce. So balancing this awareness about how we need to reduce and reuse, and then of course managing whatever waste comes to us for proper accountability and an end destination is our challenges, I would say, at this point of time. Also, the fact is that now we need to grow our teams. I mean, we've very easy able to get people from the base of the pyramid come and work in our centers. But at the same time, we do need professionals in the team, because there is a big process that has to be managed like any other business. So we do need professionals, and we need, we need to have our business attract the kind of talent like any other business. So again, that becomes a challenge, especially in the new geographies where we are currently planning to expand.
Wonderful. Wilma, I think, thanks to the audience also who's been sending questions. I think one of the, questions, Wilma, relates to what you just touched upon, on some of the challenges and, some of the people, and we know India is also full of many waste champions, out there who are trying to do something in their community and trying to actually, address the needs of the community. So how does somebody at that grassroots level, kind of start off? If there are already existing systems they can build on, it's great. But if you're new, either in a certain location, new geography, new apartment, how do I start setting up, all of these systems? And would Sahas be the great, place to go and get some help?
Yeah, so I'd really say that this is the right time to also think about setting up a waste management business, but it is important not to get dragged into, into a situation where there will be a compromise, because we've had examples of tech coming in and saying, this app you can kind of use to, and basically that the business model is around, I will come and collect your waste, I will give you some money in return, all of that. But in a holistic waste management system, there is no shortcuts, and that one does need to understand the intensity of operations, one needs to be part of that operations, and one needs to have enough of revenues to be able to meet all of those operations. So the tendency to go in for tech, which is not relevant for holistic waste management, you need to avoid that. And at the same time, make sure that there is enough of revenues for you to manage your entire operations. Today, there are brands, etc., willing to work with organizations for take back, for reverse logistics. So there are various different business models available. But if one is committed to actually managing waste holistically and with accountability, then don't take shortcuts, is what I would like to pass on as
and build it systemically. So that's very interesting.
Yes.
Vinita, one of the questions which I'm kind of rephrasing to get your insights as well. Wilma very nicely said, being in the business of waste, I don't want people to create waste. Though it's good for my probably top line, it's not good from a environment point of view. So this awareness about more responsible consumerism, I think it's an interesting one, because this is a different context, and this is a more complicated and that you were talking about, where you have to, as a corporate, say, how do I run a more sustainable business? So what does one do to, at a corporate level to create more, responsible consumerism?
I think there are several ways of looking at this. And in some ways, corporates look at it from a different angle. When we look at, cost efficiency and cost effectiveness, which is, what is the cost of doing business? But that normally comes from a lens of, so how do I become a tighter ship so that, my top line remaining the same, my bottom line improves? I think that's fine. I think finding newer, more efficient, more effective ways of doing things is something which has to be the responsibility of every corporate. But I also believe, especially in consumer products, what are we talking about? We are talking about high velocity of consumption, relatively low unit price. And, we want more and more people to buy more and more of our products more often. I think in addition to that, if we also were to say that, so what is responsible in terms of where you dispose of your wrapper? What do you do with those things? So I'll give you an example of the Coca-Cola company I worked for several years, not in India, but overseas in many geographies. I went back to Coke, after I'd left after a few years. They'd invited me to, actually, it was an interesting talk on the environment and so on. And what I found was that all the chairs in this particular room were all very smart. They were white, they were made of plastic and so on. Well, they had found someone who could take the Coke PET bottles and remold it into this furniture. In Atlanta, you've got one of the largest carpet industries that collects all the PET bottles and converts them into machine-made carpets. The fleece that Patagonia and other people use including in the Olympics, we had given, Coke being Coke, we got all these fleece jackets made, and we said that these are from the PET bottles. The point I'm making is there is already enough technology available to get started. I think the important thing that I keep coming back to is saying that, where there is a will, corporates will find a way, but there has to be an incentive. So if I'm a CEO, am I getting a higher rating because I've done all of those things? At least so far, nobody paid very much attention to that. But I think those are the kinds of things that we have to start paying more attention to. Why should my performance only be judged by my, profitability, profit margin, cash generation, etc.? It has to be a holistic measure. And we also can't be, a little bit hypocritical and say it's all about, people, planet, profit, and then forget about planet and think a little bit about people, but think a lot about profit. So I think that has to kind of reprioritize itself, which is really to say that if I do the right thing by the planet and its people, whether as consumers or employees or other stakeholders, profits will follow. I think we have to put profit as the result of, not the driving force.
Thanks, Amita. I think that balance is going to be the interesting rope walk, I guess, every corporate will have to make. Mukund, just from a, ESG/other regulatory framework, the question of once the product is in my hand as a consumer, am I responsible or the manufacturer responsible? Is that clear in the ESG/regulatory framework today? Or do you think it's, it still needs more work, in the whole resource management area?
No, it certainly needs a lot of work, and it needs constant communication and engagement between civil society and then the manufacturers, the regulators. So, I mean, the example I gave of Unilever, right? Here's an organization that's trying to educate its consumer force, is trying to say that these are the products we produce. Look, this is the carbon footprint. Now, the choice is in your hands, whether you feel comfortable consuming this or not. But what they're also doing is getting ahead of the competition, which isn't doing this yet. And therefore, sort of presenting themselves as, taking the moral high ground, being statesmen of industry, charting the path forward. They haven't yet said, don't consume my product. But you have people who are going that direction as well. I mean, I guess it was 2-3 years back when I think it was KLM, which offered people buying tickets on the airline ground-based options via train and mass transport to get to the same locations. Essentially saying, look, you don't actually have to fly me, because guess what? Flying consumes much more carbon and generates more greenhouse gases. Here's a better alternative. If you still need to, for emergency or whatever reason, fly by air, then certainly come to me. So people are looking at it even from a brand perspective. Can they shine in comparison with their peers? But it has to be an authentic conversation. People have to believe that you're doing it for the right reasons. And there's so much to be done. I think all these stakeholders have to constantly be in touch, talk about how they can elevate the bar, set higher standards, and then task those corporates that aren't following suit to do better. The good news, I think, is all of this is now beginning to happen. So if you look at the newspapers, I mean, pretty much every weekend now, most of what you read is about quality of life, how to improve standards of living. People are much more conscious. And I think those conversations, that discourse is now very well established, is just going to get better. And therefore, corporates that are worried about the brand, worried about future product consumption, will engage in these conversations and try and be seen to be doing better. And then hopefully will actually do better.
Absolutely, and I think that's definitely something we should all hope for. And coming on the hope, I mean, we're coming to the end of the session, so I think hope is a good, kind of place to kind of park this. So one request to the four of you, maybe starting with Naga, 2025, Naga, what do you hope for? What is the wish list on your mind? One wish that you really want to come to in 2025 when it comes to resource management, waste management, ESG.
Yeah. So I think one is Wilma started the fire or sow the seed, what do you call? Probably I want to see a banyan tree that come forward, boldly put out a triple bottom line report, right? The report has the revenue, it has the people impact, it has the waste management planet as well, right? So she's very keen on the people as well. So it's very important to keep the soul alive when you scale. It's easy to sell the soul to scale, right? I'm very happy to see that Wilma is disciplined, one of the best in my portfolio, that she told no to a $2 million investment. She said that that investor does not align with me. This is the same statement I've heard from Jaipur Raj Chaudhary that I admire a lot. And he also says that I've not found any equity investor so far because nobody understood my soul. So it's very important that she's defining the definition of social business. And I'm sure people need to follow that, persevere. So now the second is that, okay, so social stock exchange, I want to see that what I wrote in 2016, now the working cap, is going on. So I want to see Wilma listing there and raising the money so that the investors come there, right? People should be able to, raise grant. FPOs can come, anybody can, FPOs, NGOs, social business can come and raise grant, debt, and equity from that platform. The investors understand that, okay, I am coming there because I also understand what the investor in social business mean, not just purely driven by the number part, but the other piece also has a value. Today, we are not valuing that. But to value that, we have to define what a social business is, right? People always say that, okay, so if Wilma is a social business, his Airtel is an anti-social, right? So that people are, in India, we are a democratic country. There is always, there is the other side. But we need to define social business. That's what I put out. It's 100 years of celebrating. It's very bad word to say celebrating that Gandhi wearing a poor man's cloth, right? It's 100 years, September 22nd, 1921, he changed his attire. But we have not seen his kurta back yet. So I'm telling them, let's call it as a G-biz, because there are so many terms out there. As Mukund rightly said, there is a, SASB, then you have a B-Corp, there is a conscious capitalism, business call for action, you name it, around 20 words are there. And a social business entrepreneur going to go nuts, right? Solving all that. The government of India should define a Z-biz, that's a social business. So Wilma already put out what a social business definition. So Wilma becoming a G-biz, listing in social stock exchange. That
would be for 2025. Vinita, your wish, hope for 2025.
Everything that Naga has said. And, actually, I feel every business is a social business. I mean, and I'm not being cute when I say this. I think we've got to find metrics and measurements for business performance, including what your stock is valued on the stock exchange, that takes into account not just the profit I generate, but the quality of the profit I generate. So, a new set of metrics and measurements, simple, easy to determine, but which actually calls out to each business that, whatever you do, it has to be environmentally sustainable, socially equitable, and responsible from a governance point of view.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thanks, Vinita, for that. Mukund, your wish, hope.
So 2 years back, I wrote an article for the Hindustan Times about whether the time was right for India to have a green party. And perhaps in 2025, it'll be great to see actually a green party in India, which, if nothing else, at least puts pressure on all the other political parties to include sizable references in the manifestos on what needs to change, I think, in terms of the attitudes and perspectives and consumerism and the role of corporates in India. So that would be maybe one wish that I would have.
Brilliant. No, that's a really
Germany
really interesting.
Mukund, yeah.
Germany's already got. Oh my God. Wilma, your hope and wish for 2025.
Yeah, just one thing, that the business model which has resource recovery and 96% resource recovery becomes the solution for waste management, and that will then address our waste problems in India. So that's what I really think is possible, and that's what we hope for.
Brilliant. No, that's amazing, Wilma. I remember probably almost 10, 12 years ago, when we were in the early days of Sahas, the social enterprise, and we were dreaming about setting this up and building this in the way, it has actually turned out. So I think it's very clear that if you can dream and hope, it's possible. You've shown the path, Wilma and Sahas. So big congratulations again to all of you at Sahas. Thanks for this opportunity, and a big thanks to Vinita, Naga, and Mukund for joining us as well. Really enjoyed having this conversation. Sorry we couldn't answer all the questions, but we had a great time, and good luck to everyone. Thank you.
I think Arun will quickly have a last word. Arun, my colleague, would like to I propose a vote of thanks. Yeah, Arun?
Yes, thank you, Wilma. Thanks to the panelists, and it was gripping indeed. It was really fantastic to hear all the views. It's great to see all the participants who stayed back till the last minute as well. So I would like to give a vote of thanks for today. Through this gathering today, we have tried to bring to the table a commitment to overall business practices. Planet and people have to feature as priorities, and we hope that our bold step towards holistic impact reporting will pave the way for all social businesses. I would just like to share a few thoughts from the entire discussion today, picking up words from everyone's discussion. Would like to highlight that, today we discussed about how Europe is way ahead of the curve. But honestly, over the past few years, we can see India's catching up. The government that we spoke about, the young generation that we spoke about, and also the ecosystem is really ready to scale. And what's better time to scale it the right way? And that is why today Sahas Zero Waste have set out our achievements of intended impact. We heard that every enterprise creates impact, but Sahas Zero Waste has intended impact, and we look forward to scaling up the impact and set this as a benchmark today. Move from this benchmark today. On behalf of Team Sahas Zero Waste, I would like to thank Dr. Mukund Rajan for being with us today, releasing our report and endorsing our roadmap for change. A big thank you to our panelists, Vinita Bali, who is an independent director. We know will continue to be a person in the boardroom who's going to spearhead change. Likewise, Naga, who will continue to shake up the investor community and cheer for impact being at the forefront. Thanks, Sri Krishna, for setting the right tone for the webinar, asking the questions which matter and seeking answers which will propel us to think differently. We had a great audience for this event, and we thank each one of you for being with us today right till the final minute. We will be emailing you our circular impact report along with today's Zoom recording. And to wrap it up, I'm sure that this is just going to be the start, and we look forward to continuing this engagement and conversation towards a common goal of what we believe with nature, people, and technology. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day ahead.